Okay, if I can have you all take your seats. I know we're starting a couple minutes early, but I'm so glad some of you latecomers were able to come and join us on such a hot and sticky day. Weird intermingling of heat and sweat and rain showers. But it's nice and cool in here, so we're so glad you were able to join us. So let's go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to the kickoff event for the Educate for Opportunity project. My name is Amanda Winters. I know many of you. I'm the Program Director for Postsecondary Education at the National Governors Association. I'm based in the NGA Solutions Center for Best Practices. So if you don't know a lot about NGA, we are a nonpartisan organization that represents the collective voice of the nation's governors from 55 states, territories, and commonwealths. In the Center for Best Practices, NGA Solutions, we are the research and development arm of NGA, and we provide policy assistance and opportunities for technical assistance where the governor's staff can learn about promising practices and develop innovative solutions to the problems that states are facing. So the NGA Postsecondary team takes an innovative and cross-cutting approach, and we have representation from K-12, higher education, human services, and workforce policy. So just so you can get a sense of the purpose of the event and who's in the room, we've extended invitation to this event to state folks and higher education leaders, and many of whom are joining us by webcast today. We have 20 plus states represented on our webcast, so we're very excited to have them virtually join us. And a lot of you folks in the room, we invited you because you are experts in your field, and we want to engage with you during the course of this project. So we'll be working through our new project, Educate for Opportunity, through the generous support and thought partnership of Strada Education Network to support states and their institutions in thinking about innovative and people-centered approaches to connecting post-secondary education and work for adult populations. The Strada-Gallup Consumer Insights data, which you're going to hear more about in some of the presentations today, provides an exciting new data source for policymakers to consider, bringing a voice from the consumers to some of the policy planning. So to all of you who have joined us in person today, thank you very much for coming out. This isn't just an event to showcase our project, but it could be because I'm very proud of it. It's also an opportunity for us to engage with each of you. You were invited specifically because of the type of work that you do with states. Many of you are doing relevant research, policy analysis, or coordination of state-centered initiatives. Some of you work specifically with community colleges or with four-year institutions, while some are focused on advocating for equity, access, student success, or attainment. All of us in the room are working towards many of the same goals, but from different directions. So we will all want to help states craft strong policies and programs to support individuals and families to have equitable opportunities to thrive. I've only been at NGA for about a year and a half, but something that's been central to the work that I've been doing, and many of you around the room hopefully can feel this in the way that I work, is that we need to develop and sustain partnerships to better serve states and the state work. There's plenty of work to be done, and our work is better when we do it together. So that's why you all are invited to join us today. I'd love for you during the course of the conversations and in the reception that we have afterwards. Sorry to the live stream folks that you can't join us for that. But in the reception afterwards, I'd love to engage about the work that you all are doing, the way we can connect it to the states who are selected to be a part of our initiative, the resources that you have, the research that informs the work. The goal of this part of the project is to network and create a support structure around states who are trying to do this work to catalyze innovation. All of you play a key role in this. I look forward to learning from all of you about the knowledge and expertise that you bring to this work with states, and hopefully bringing that and braiding it in with the work and technical assistance that we're trying to do to help adult populations in states better connect to post-secondary education and work. So at the end of today's agenda, we're going to discuss and then release our request for applications for the Educate for Opportunity project. Governors are already prioritizing a focus on adults with issues around reskilling, upskilling, future workforce needs, rural regional development, justice-involved individuals, folks with some college and no degree, free college efforts, and so many more strategies. We're hopeful that this project will connect and focus and accelerate these efforts. I'll talk more about some of the details in the request for applications at the end, but first we wanted to provide some framing for the project, our approach, and specifically our partnership with Strada Education Network. So our agenda for this afternoon is first to focus in on the partnership piece, and then to engage some expert voices on how states can think about alignment of efforts and supporting adult students. For those of you joining over the webcast, those state folks who might be considering submitting an application, these conversations will help you better to understand the foundation and the big picture goals of the project. We'll have a short networking break in between our two presentations. At the end of the state strategy panel, which is second, I'll be back up to discuss the release and timeline for the request for applications. For those of you who have joined in DC, again, please plan to stick around after the RFA release to join us for a short reception to discuss the collaborative opportunities that you can highlight through this discussion. A few logistical notes before I introduce our first speakers. Restrooms. They are not on this floor, unfortunately. There's restrooms on the 5th floor or on the 1st floor. So the 1st floor, it's very near the registration table. So if you have to step out, those are where you can find those. Also, we have on the screen here the Wi-Fi password. I'm sharing that not so that you can go on and do other things on the internet, but so that you can tweet if you are so inclined. Our hashtag is #EducateForOpportunity. And I love the number 4 in the middle. It doesn't really, the 4 doesn't mean anything. It's just, I like it. I like it. So that's the only reason. So now, on to the first session in our agenda. This is going to be a focused armchair conversation to frame up this partnership. First, I'm very excited, and I'll have him come up in just a moment, to introduce my boss, Martin Simon. Martin Simon is the director of the NGA Economic Opportunity Division, which includes our post-secondary team at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, NGA Solutions. In this position, he's responsible for managing and providing strategic direction for the center's analysis, research, information development, and technical assistance services to governors and states related to workforce development, post-secondary education, human services, and economic development policy and programs. On a personal note, he has been a strong and supportive leader through the development of this and other projects, and my work is much richer because of his expertise. Joining Martin to discuss the project and partnership is Bill Hansen, President and CEO of Strada Education Network. Bill has more than 30 years of experience in education at the kindergarten to 12th grade and post-secondary levels. As Strada Education Network CEO, Hansen oversees a nonprofit organization that promotes completion with a purpose, helping all students build a more purposeful path from post-secondary education to achieving rewarding careers and fulfilling lives. Hansen is recognized as a national leader in the education sector. He has served as U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education from 2001 to 2003, acting as the department's chief operating officer. Hansen was a member of 4 state education commissions in the Commonwealth of Virginia, helping to improve education and workforce opportunities for students. He was appointed as a commissioner on the National Commission on the Cost of Higher Education. He serves as an advisory board member for the University of Virginia Curry School of Education and Southern Virginia University. He also served on the board of nonprofit organizations, including the education sector, Reading is Fundamental, the National Guard Youth Foundation, and Thanks USA. Hansen is currently on the board of the Forum of Future of Higher Education, which hosts the Aspen Symposium. He also serves on boards, I know this is very impressive, and I'm not even telling you all of it. He also serves on the boards of the Jackie Robinson Foundation, the National Urban League, Million Meal Movement, United Way of Central Indiana, and the George W. Romney Institute of Public Management at Brigham Young University. He has so many accomplishments and examples of leadership. We are so excited to be able to call him our partner in this effort to elevate the work of states. Please join me in welcoming Bill Hansen and Martin Simon for a conversation on the challenges and opportunities of the work ahead.
Well, thank you, Amanda. It's a great setup. Bill, I didn't realize the vast experience that you have over 30 years. But what I think is interesting is it's in the public sector, working at the state level, at the federal level, and then in the private sector, running several international businesses, and then the nonprofit sector. So we're really looking forward to your insights and perspective on Educate for Opportunity. And as Amanda said, we're really excited about this partnership. We think it aligns so closely with the priorities of governors, and I have to say the opportunity to work with Carol D'Amico and Anna Gatlin on designing this project has been a delight. It's not often you get to work that closely with a supporter on designing a project, and so we're looking forward to continuing that working relationship as this project unfolds. So we're going to have a dialogue here and tap into some of those insights and experiences you have. So let me just start with overarching question, and we've all been are aware that there's conversations going on around the country in every state about education, jobs, the changing economy, and economic opportunity, and it's kind of driven by a tight labor market, higher cost of education, the disparities in income, and a variety of other factors. We know this is a top priority for governors. The NGA's Chairs Initiative this year, Good Jobs for All Americans, indicates the strong interest on the part of governors. Our chair, Governor Steve Bullock from Montana, when he chose this initiative, this focus for his initiative as chair, is well aware that all the governors are concerned about the residents in their states having access to good jobs. And when we look across the states, they understand, states, governors understand that a path to a good job is going to require a post-secondary education that leads to a credential. So why is Strada investing so much in the connection between education and work?
Thank you, Martin. It's a great question, and I think if you take a step back, we're still a pretty new organization, a little over 2 years old, and rebranded ourselves. We were, I think, the largest guarantee agency in the country and helped solve the access problem in our country. And not that it's solved, but I think over the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was a big issue for us to, as a society, create universal access to higher education. And we provided $250 billion of support to 23 million students across the country, but that business no longer existed when I started with the company 6 years ago. And when I started 6 years ago, we were thinking of, what national problems now do we want to solve? And back, if everybody will remember, 6 years ago, our economy was in a different position, still in the middle of the downturn and tough labor market. And we really, I coined the term completion with a purpose, to help us really focus on the completion agenda, which is critical, but to also do it in a way that is meaningful and impactful to the lives of millions of Americans. And so, I really tried to capture folks' maybe imagination about what problems do we want to solve. And one of the critical problems that we've been trying to address are the 44 million working adults who are kind of in the bottom quartile, making $35,000 a year or less, no higher education. I think we're left behind by the rugged economy in the previous 10 years, now trying to upskill and get back onto the on-ramp and further advance their capabilities and economic upward mobility. And the second area is the 6-7 million disaffected youth in our country. Just again, a really critical population pool. One of the statistics that I just find still most shocking after my 15 years in the federal government and all the work that we've done to try to level the playing field is that the top quartile income-wise of our population will 60% of those will graduate. The bottom quartile, it's 11% within 6 years. And it just, to me, that is just a national tragedy that we are continuing to fail generation after generation of those who need the help, the infrastructure the most in our country. And the other couple of issues, one is the disconnect where over 90% of university provosts believe their students are ready to enter the workforce. 90+% of CEOs feel like the graduates coming out of universities are not prepared to enter the workforce. And And then we've also got the 7.5 million unfilled jobs around this country, and again, just don't feel like our state systems, our employers, our universities are aligned to prepare graduates for the jobs of today, much less the jobs for tomorrow. So that's really what we're focused on, and looking to work with key partners to help us find the successful opportunities to go out and solve these national problems.
Great. You threw out several data points, and so I know data is really important to Strada, and increasingly we're seeing governors looking for high quality data to inform their decision making. You talked about the disconnect between what provosts and CEOs of companies in terms of their perception of the talent that they're getting from the system. I know you have a partnership with Gallup around the consumer insights on data, and so you mentioned like I said, CEOs and education leadership. This is the consumers talking, and so in fact, the first time I met you was when Strada brought together all the partners to get have a deep dive on the Gallup information that's coming out of the Consumer Insights. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you see that data being used by policymakers?
Absolutely, and you mentioned Anna and Carol. We've also got Dave Clayton with us today, and Dave joined us a year and a half ago or so to really help take our Gallup project and again take it to the next level, and working with our key partners around the country. But Carol, actually, I'm going to give her the credit here. She had this vision about 4 years ago that as we're trying to solve these problems, the institutions of higher education are terrific. We've got the best system in the world, but it's not serving with some of the data that I just mentioned everybody well, and pockets of our society well. One of the things that, we got some wonderful scoring companies and things with US News and other activities out there, but the one thing that really struck us is that a lot of work in higher education is based on inputs and not outcomes, and we thought it would be very important to see if we can get that voice of the consumer to help us drive the change, because I've been in the policy world at the state and federal level for probably more than half of my life, and it's always kind of in the esoteric and not in the real world. And so we have now interviewed about 350,000 18 to 65-year-olds. These are 13-minute interviews. These are getting a lot of data on these adults, and we have so much information on the regret factor, the value of higher education, and it is based on the consumer. And almost every other sector that we look at, whether it's the healthcare sector or any survey that you take after you go to your bank or anywhere else, and we don't have that in our higher education system. So this has been incredibly valuable to us, and it's really provided, I think, a differentiator for us to be able to work with our partners and our network to help bring that voice to bring about the changes that we're looking for.
Not to put you on the spot, Bill, but were there some standouts from that information that as you were gathering it?
Yeah, I think one that really is out there is that over 50% of regret either their institution, their program, their degree, and so again, being able to provide the data, the insights, the transparency to help people make the right decisions based on what are the job outcomes of a certain degree, how much debt should you be taking or not taking on. And I think that regret factor is one of the more important ones. There's also the relevance factor of, there's some data that I think you'll be seeing coming soon as well of that the most relevant degrees are actually in the vocational and trade school as well as the advanced degrees versus the bachelor's degree. And so I think sometimes we, again, maybe need to be taking a look at the bachelor's degree and determining its relevance. And again, there's obviously pockets and degrees that are directly relevant to career paths, but obviously there are a lot that are not, because it is far below the other in terms of the relevance in people's lives.
I think that's going to be unique. That's a unique focus, and getting the consumer voice is not something that policymakers have very often. And so, I think it's going to be very valuable. It's certainly going to be a valuable part of this project as we roll it out. And I think being able to have that additional voice to inform the policy decisions that governors are making. So, glad that you have that partnership with the Gallup. I think every day we hear about technology changes and how it's affecting workplaces and workers, and we know that there's both the opportunity side of it, there's jobs being created and creating opportunities for some workers, but you mentioned that it's leaving a lot of other workers behind that don't really have the skills and knowledge and need to upgrade their skills. That was an important focus of Governor Bullock's chair's initiative on mid-career workers, those that are being left behind and don't have the opportunity for a variety of reasons. They have families to support, there aren't the hours at educational institutions don't align with the job schedules they have to keep. There's a report out recently from the World Economic Forum that estimates there's going to be about 1.5 million workers that are likely to be dislocated because of technology changes. The cost of retraining somewhere around $35 billion. So the need for systems that allow more on and off ramps are going to be even more important as those changes work their way into our economy. So what do you see some strategies that states can be considering about building a continuous learning system that provides those opportunities for workers that will be impacted by technology? Well,
we're actually working on 3 or 4 different fronts on this. We launched the Institute for the Future of Work a little over a year ago that Michelle Weiss runs for us. She used to work with Clayton Christensen up at the, and help co-author some of the innovator dilemma work that he did in higher education. But we're really trying to conduct the research on. Michelle and her team put out a report, I think it was back in December, called Robot Ready, with one of our affiliated organizations called MC, to really look to where the jobs of the future are going to be and how the disruptions in our economy and technology are going to bring about those changes. So again, policymakers can get out front, institutions can get out front, employers can get out front on that. Also MC, and it stands for an economic modeling impact organization, but they are really one of the best organizations out there that help states, help regions, help economies, help institutions, help employers, figure out where to build a new headquarters, where to build a new facility, what types of new program offerings universities should offer, and have the real solutions and the real capacity to work with the data to help those organizations and institutions figure out where they need to be and what they need to be doing for the future. And I would say the most important piece is what we're here for today, and that's working with the governors. I just, still a recovering federal holic after 15 years, and luckily I've been gone for 15 years as well. But but this is where the real work gets done, and no disrespect to, I think I saw Martha here, or another former undersecretary at the department. So, but it's just. A lot of good work is done there, but I think that the real work is going to be done at with the employers and at the institutional level, and that can't be done from Washington, and it's got to be done, in my mind, at the state level. And so this is where, and Carol was actually, I'll maybe let her talk about the state she was at. Actually was up in Rhode Island a week or so ago with, I think it was 120 employers, and that's where the change is going to happen, because the governors have the convening power, the economic development power, the workforce development power, the institutional oversight with universities to really help bring those key stakeholders to the table to try to get their regional systems within their states, their statewide systems, maybe even beyond states if the states next door have some homogeneous areas of economic relevance to one another. And that's why we've found it so important to work with your good organization and your good members to really help us partner and bring those solutions to the table, because I think the convening and the leadership power that the governors have is going to be just absolutely critical to finding these solutions.
So it just underscores the focus of this this project, the education to work, and so yeah, states face a lot of challenges in trying to create opportunities for everyone in their state post-secondary. There's been a pervasive challenge, though, around equity of access to completion of post-secondary education for underserved populations. Governors for many years, states and governors focused on access, increasing access to post-secondary education, but it became clear pretty early on that they had to really refocus those efforts on resiliency and completion of credentials that lead to a job. There are 41 states that have post-secondary education goals, and they know that if they're going to reach those goals, they're going to have to bring in these underserved populations and provide them opportunities for being able to have access both to the programs, but also to complete those programs. So, what do you see as some promising practices out there around addressing this equity challenge?
One of the things with Anna and Carol's leadership these last couple of years, we've been working with states directly, and just maybe a couple of examples. Working with Governor Bullock in Montana with his Native American population. He's got 7 tribally controlled colleges in the state. We also helped fund, I think they have the largest per capita veterans who are coming back into the workforce, and then also we funded a Jobs for America's Graduate program up there as well. But those are 3 very specific examples and practices and priority populations that need to be addressed. And we've also focused our state philanthropic efforts, and we worked with Governor Sandoval in helping get Western Governors University launched in Nevada. Worked on a couple of other states as well, but again, their average graduate's 35 years old, working adults, sometimes single with children, helping them get these competency-based approaches. We also funded a grant to Governor Nixon in Missouri to help the state system there. They already had WGU there, but to help the state university system expand their competency-based approaches as well. So, between things like Jobs for America's Graduate, where we're helping disaffected high school youth that otherwise would never be on that pathway, working with the veterans and Native American populations to help them get back onto the on-ramps, but also really the working adults in many respects. We focus so much on the 20 million people that are that 18 to 25-year-old, on-campus student, but with the 44 million adults that we're talking about, the millions that are in that leaky pipeline that never even get in or drop out, and that statistic I used at only 11% of the lowest quartile will persist and graduate. It's one of the things with Strada that we've actually acquired several nonprofit companies like Roadtrip Nation, which has services and products to help high school kids, working adults, college kids figure out their pathways in life. Inside Track is, I think, probably our national, our best mentoring products around the country, and so we're trying to help seed with our philanthropy these good ideas and to partner with these good organizations such as JAG, but then also trying to help with the solutions that we can bring to the table to help, again, solve the coaching and mentoring, and as well as the retention challenges. And most of these are all dedicated to that most challenging population to help succeed and get through.
One of the things that we learned from the workshops we held as part of the Good Jobs for All America initiative was that we have to take a much more holistic approach. We have to look at what are the barriers that individuals are experiencing, and there's no one solution for each individual. Some are going to have childcare issues, some are going to have transportation, scheduling issues, and so looking at this more holistically and providing more comprehensive approach. And that usually means bringing together resources from different systems, a much more importance on the integration of services that create opportunities for these people that are left behind. We know that working on aligning education to work is not going to be an easy task. We've done a lot of work with states over the years, and it's more than just aligning systems. It really causes a different way of thinking about our education systems. Cultural change, I'd say. Business has to think about it differently in terms of their hiring practices, their promotion practices. Even the general public has to look at it differently. I think we all have to think of education as a continuous process, not a terminal event that ends with a degree or a credential. So what do you think are some of the biggest barriers that are affecting the ability of states and others to be able to build a continuous learning system?
I just think we still have such a challenge of, I think part of it's complacency, but it's also just sometimes we're more concerned about protecting the systems and institutions versus the families and the students. And I say that very respectfully, as I think we've again have the best higher education system in the world, but it has some tremendous holes in it, especially for the non-traditional or type of students. So I think that some of the most important things we can do, are really we are in this world of technology and innovation, and I still feel like our system and our expectations and the decisions we're making are based on a 1950 platform. And somebody was talking to me the other day about 2050 is only 30 years away, and 1950 was 70 years away, and it just, I think as we look to the future, we're still kind of looking at it with the 70-year, 100-year chain linked to us. So I just think that we've got to, I've got 6 married kids, 6 in-laws, 12 grandkids, and they view the world very, very differently than an old 60-year-old man like I do, and their expectations, the way they learn is different. The number of jobs they're going to be in and out of are different. The types of training, and I just, there's some great ideas out there of, where it's really pulling in the employers and to getting them. And again, I think there's a lot of challenges with for them to also look at their employees differently, to look at the talent pool differently, to look at all of their corporate training dollars differently, and how they are utilizing those dollars to really help upskill their employees. And so I think a lot of this is, there are a lot of resources out there from the hundreds of billions of dollars, from spending $500 billion a year on our higher education system, not to mention all of the employer-provided assistance, and it really is just trying to really help us look for some different models, and so that's again why I'm hoping we can get some great ideas coming out of our project together. But it's got to, I do think, and there are policies that matter. I look at the federal work study program, and that $1 billion is basically going out to help students who are, most of them are in jobs on campus versus meaningful internships, apprenticeships, things that are going to help further their advancement and interest in what they're going to be doing when they get out of college. And so I think between our workforce dollars, even our Title IV dollars, a lot of our state dollars could be very much deployed very, very differently to, we know a lot of what works, and our Gallup work is showing that, students that have, a professor that cares, to have a meaningful project, to have an internship, are going to be much more likely to, be on a positive career pathway and to have a positive relevance of their education and their life. And but again, our programs are still geared towards the past and not towards what we really need to be doing for the future.
I heard you allude to the importance of partnerships, public-private partnerships. Employers invest a lot. There's certainly the public dollars, but they're not really aligned that well. And I think we talk about engaging with employers all the time, but I think we have to look at employers as investors along with the public sector. And as, just one last question to wrap up this part of, what advice would you give to governors that are interested? Well, I know all governors are actually interested in trying to bring about changes in their education system, their post-secondary education systems, to create more opportunities. What would be the advice you would give governors?
It would be to be bold and to think creatively, but I also am just incredibly gratified. Back in January, I was looking at a lot of the state addresses by the governors, and I think if my calculations are right, over 40 of them spoke to this very issue of education to employment and upskilling and workforce development, economic development activities. And so in many respects they're there. It's, I think, trying to figure out how do we bring some of the best practices together that can be fine-tuned to their respective states and their areas to help bring the playbook or help bring the tools together to help them find success. And that's again what we're working on every day between our social impact investing, our companies that we're working with, and our philanthropy and national engagement work, is to really try to harness those good ideas, those best practices, and to try to bring them to bear. But again, I think there's already such a great leadership pool out there. It's, but I think even like with this project, it's sometimes finding those ones that are maybe a little further advanced, or ones that maybe have an infrastructure or capacity or desire to move ahead a little more aggressively, and to try to get those showcased and come up with some ideas to replicate around the country. But it's we're just incredibly appreciative of the opportunity to work together, because this is again where I really believe the change is going to happen, and it's critical. I just we just can't continue to leave generation after generation behind in our system, or we're going to keep getting the same results in our economy and in our just our human condition in our country.
We really don't have the luxury of leaving anyone behind, really. And well, I think this project, Educate for Opportunity, is an opportunity for us to take some bold action with states. So I really like that you emphasize that, which means there's going to have to be some risks taken, and I think this project gives a forum for the states that we're going to be able to work with to take some risks and try some new things. So we also very much value the partnership. I think we're going to have some time for some questions from the audience and from the 25 states that are out there on the webinar.
If you could raise your hand, I'll bring a mic around.
Raise your hand if you have questions. Project.
There's a question over here.
Hi, Bill. Deborah Cromie with Education Finance Council. So when we look at training programs, and not just the education piece, the employer has a job waiting on the other end of it, and I'm thinking more of those that have some college but maybe didn't complete, or adults that need to go back. What some of our members are seeing is there are some broader issues related to that around someone can't just stop working to go through an education program. They have a family they're responsible, they have childcare issues, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about anything that you've been doing to date, or your thoughts around how do we provide that greater support system to allow folks to go back to school, to get the training to meet those workforce development needs at the state level.
Thank you, Deborah. And again, I think some of the opportunities out there that we've been trying to work on with the experiential learning. One of our nonprofit companies in our family is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, CALE, and again, really trying to work to help identify those types of opportunities with employers and others. But I think there's also some very key innovations going on around our country. Our social impact investing is very much focused on helping fund some new ideas that are out there, and I think everything from the boot camps to some of these certificate type of programs, these short-term training programs. I think the population that you mentioned in your question are not able to go back to a traditional campus and live in a dormitory with their 4 kids and whatever it might be. So they've got to be able to find those short-term programs that are available to them. And it's just been in our social impact investing side of our house, which I haven't talked about. There really are just some incredible innovative and disruptive ideas going on out there that again, we're trying to help give them some of the funding and investments that they need to help scale and to provide those types of upskilling opportunities to a lot of different populations.
So we have another.
Hello, Bill. You mentioned that sort of some angst about the fact that we were just not innovating fast enough, that it seems like a stagnant structure, if you will, in higher education. Obviously, the signaling that we receive from business and industry is important. Tell me how you think that signaling can accelerate the kind of innovation you would like to see, and what are you hearing from businesses as you engage with them?
I think that, again, the rate of acceleration just of what's going on around us, when I talk about my kids and grandkids, it's sometimes mind-numbing to me of just the rate of change that is going on. I feel like the world's getting smaller and smaller at the same time, and so I think we've got to be able to adapt and change even more quickly to get out front. And when I wish Michelle was here, she can talk a lot more articulately than I can, but even our institutions have, I think, some challenges. We got a big cliff coming up in just 10 years in 2030 with the demographic numbers of kids that are the traditional kids are going to be enrolling in our higher education system. And so even beyond the way kids are learning or beyond the technology, our universities, many of them are going to be facing some severe challenges in the next 10 years just by the type and number of traditional students that are going to be in that pipeline. And for our economy and everything else, I think they've really got to be looking for ways to adapt quickly and effectively. And again, there's so many great examples out there of what Arizona State is doing with their online program, but using their core of their academic programs to take that online. Just my alma mater, George Mason, across the river, just trying to tear down. One of our grants that we funded to George Mason was to help anybody in the Northern Virginia Community College system have the complete transfer of credit from Nova to George Mason. And that wasn't the case in the 1970s. I actually was a transfer student to Mason and lost about 20 credits, and I was going to night school, and that made me have to go to night school about an extra 2 years because of the credits that I lost as a working adult. And so I think a lot of these types of things are just really important for the models, and to tear down some of these old barriers of the way institutions look at things, and to build partnerships like what Mason and Nova have done, what they've also done with the business community as well. So they're just, I could probably give you a list of about 20 things of the transfer of credit, but to the partnerships with the community colleges, employers across the board. But there are some deep challenges just from the demographics of both of the increased number of working adults, but also the decreasing number, just the Gen X and coming through the pipeline that we've got to deal with.
Just to add to that, we're hearing from employers, particularly when it comes to upgrading their skills, looking for those shorter term learning opportunities that may lead to a certificate or badge of some kind, and then looking for how they can partner with post-secondary education institutions on providing that. More employers are looking at setting aside dollars to provide to support training, particularly larger employers, but we're seeing middle-sized employers realizing it also. There's been kind of a shift where workers were more disposable, but now as the labor market has tightened, employers are coming around to looking at having to create those education opportunities for their existing employers. And so that's an important shift and timely shift.
Time for one final question. One final question.
Steve Wojtek with ACT. Just curious about the sort of intersection at the federal level. Are there going to be opportunities for states to kind of connect the dots or leverage the existing federal investments in this space? And if so, what are they?
I'll take a cut at it first. Well, those of you that are familiar with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, it was, I know you're not at all familiar with that. It was, a major premise of it was to structure it so that programs that provide training and education opportunities would be integrated. The board structures at the state and local level were set up for that purpose, and federal agencies, probably more than I've seen them in my long tenure in this field, have cooperated with that, and then legislation, the Carl Perkins legislation that was passed last year, built on some of the provisions in WIOA that called for working together and bringing together the resources. And so, and I'm hoping that when Congress gets around to the Higher Education Act, that they continue to build on some of the groundwork that's been laid in WIOA and Carl Perkins. So I don't think the system has taken full advantage of those opportunities that have been built in, and the plans for Carl Perkins are coming due, and I know we've been messaging out to states that this is a real opportunity to bring together resources across systems. So those are some of where I see the opportunities are there. Anything to add?
I think that's really wouldn't add too much. Maybe just with the HEA coming up, and again, I think in this environment it's going to be tough to do anything too disruptive, too innovative, too bold. But I still think between either the campus-based programs, the Title IV programs, when I was in the number 3 job at the department back when Lamar Alexander was secretary in the early 90s, he kicked off this idea of this lifelong learning account, and I think that's probably more needed now more than ever to try to align all of the Title IV aid with the reality that people aren't just going to be going for the 4 years of a traditional undergraduate. And I am also a proponent of a block grant or some type of a state grant program to create some innovation and opportunities at the state level, and I just think that could be very, very helpful with the state funding and financing programs, and to come up with some maybe better and more innovative and modern solutions on how the flow of funds are working. But I don't want to be a pessimist on it. I don't know if there's going to be much opportunity in the next 2 years. I hope there is, but I just, again, I think the boldness is going to happen at the state level, because I don't put a lot of faith or trust that something bold or innovative or disruptive is going to be coming out of Washington on this. Just they don't quote me on that.
Well, that's a good way to end this conversation on boldness and the message for states to be bold. Yep. So thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation and for the partnership. We're very much looking forward to the launch of this project. Thanks, Bill.
We're going to take a short break, about 15 minutes. We have coffee and water. Remember, restrooms are on the 5th and the 1st floor. We're going to set up for our next panel. I'll give you a 5-minute warning when we're about to head back.
beautiful. Yeah, you know, I worked there a year in Colorado. So it was good. Colorado, I love Colorado. Yeah, Colorado was amazing. I loved it there. Yeah. It was good. But it was so great to see Ted. Yeah. The forum was an interesting mix of people. He said it was only okay. Yeah. I think he said it was better 10 years ago. I see, that was my first time going. But I was thinking, oh, okay, it's kind of odd title for the number of kinds of.
All right. If we could have folks move to their seats, we got a lot of open seats here on the other side. Make sure you grab your coffee. You know, it's never easy following people like Martin and Bill, so we have some big shoes to fill here. But thankfully, I don't have to do all the work because I have a fantastic panel of some really great experts who are going to help us dive a little more into these issues. My name is Mike Bartlett. I'm a senior policy analyst at NGA Economic Opportunity. It's been my pleasure for the past 4 years to be serving governors and states. Previously worked in the office of Governor Steve Beshear in the state of Kentucky. So this whole concept of connecting the worlds of education and the worlds of work has been something I've been very passionate about for a very long time. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have some brief kind of remarks from each of our panelists, and I'll introduce them here shortly. And then we're just going to launch into a conversation. We're real excited to bring a variety of perspectives, both educational institutions, from states, from the national perspective. So we're going to try and come at this issue from all angles because, as we heard put very well earlier today, this is not a problem that can be fixed or solved or addressed by any one part of systems within states or even for us as a country. So without further ado, I'll start with introductions of our panelists and then I'll turn it over to them. And there will be time for questions at the end. So if you think of a question, write it down and we will try and call on you. So first to my left is Carol D'Amico. Carol needs very little introduction. Many of you know her. She is a senior, well, let's see, make sure I get it exactly right here, Executive Vice President at the Strada Education Network. As Martin said, she has been a partner with us on this and a thought leader who's contributed excellent ideas and really pushed us to try and move the envelope forward in and across states. And we're very excited to have her and what she'll be sharing with us. To her left, we have Mushtaq Gunja, who's the Vice President at the American Council of Education, a long experience working in and across educational institutions and brings kind of an institutional perspective and also a national perspective to this, previously working at Georgetown University. Is that correct?
That's right.
Excellent. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Kim Hunter-Reid, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education in Louisiana. She's been in that position for a couple of years now, just about.
A year?
A year. That's a veteran status just about, and previously was in Colorado where she served in a similar role. So bringing us a state perspective in the trenches every day from a couple of different states that are different states but have very similar challenges, I can imagine. So without further ado, Carol, I want to turn it over to you first. Tell us a little bit about some of your work over the last several years, how you approach these ideas of connecting education and work, and what do you think governors should be focusing on?
Thank you, Michael. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming and those on the live stream from the States. And thank you to NGA. They've been a great thought partner, Martin, Amanda, Michael. We're really excited about today and launching this initiative. For the last 3.5 years, Strada, as Bill said, has been engaged in a project that at the time, and I think still is, a very unique one, and that is looking at what would education look like if it was designed for and with consumers. So we set out about learning what consumers want, expect, what their perceptions are of higher education today. And boy, we've learned a lot. And so this initiative is to really, in partnership with NGA and the states, is to take some of those insights we're getting from talking to almost 350,000 Americans, all the way from those who never graduated from high school, all the way through postgraduate. So if I can spend just a couple of minutes maybe giving some of the interesting insights that really drives our work at Strada, whether it's our research, our philanthropy, and our affiliates, solutions that are in our network. First of all, we've learned that consumers want higher education. About half of them are motivated to upskill. That varies, though, across states, of a low of 20% in one state to a high of 60% in another, which suggests to me that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to this issue of how do we upscale America. We've learned that the number one motivation for upskilling for consumers is the promise of a career outcome, whether it's more money, a better job, or on a career pathway. And that when that education is purposeful toward that career or that pathway, consumers think they get more value out of the experience. And we're learning a lot about what makes for a valuable experience. And so what you're going to see, if you didn't already while we had these slides scrolling, is that we've asked consumers, did you get a good cost value, and did you get a good career value from your experience in higher education? And value varies widely. by state, by city, by program of study, and even within a state, by college and university that you attended. And one of the most interesting insights that we gained, that when I presented this to a state that had free tuition for adults, is they had a low cost value rating. Now, how could that be? It's free. Well, when adults are looking at cost value and value, they're thinking about more than just the price of tuition. They're thinking of time lost with their family. They're thinking of time off from work. They're thinking of lost opportunity costs. So they look at value not just in, is it free? In fact, when you ask them what would motivate you to go back, it's, is it relevant to my career goals? Is it flexible for my lifestyle? And is it affordable in that order? So when states are thinking about how do we upskill our residents, our citizens, the one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to work. The other interesting thing, I think somebody asked a question before of Bill Hansen, our CEO, of the some college, no degree, the people who have stopped out. Well, they're the ones that have the least amount of value perception. And so the states that think that it's easy to get those back into the pipeline, some college, no degree, in fact, they're the least motivated to go back because they had a bad customer experience. So these are the kinds of insights that, Michael, that we're hoping that we can share with the states that participate in this project, and states really looking at their own data, because it varies by state, and really focusing their strategies to upskill their adults based on what we're learning about those adults in their states and hearing directly from the people. So we're real excited about this work. You can tell I'm kind of passionate.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to actually ask people what they want, to test our assumptions and to make sure that the public policies we're trying to craft meet their needs. And there too often, we'll have policy discussions and we'll craft white papers, and that kind of feedback loop isn't always clear how that happens in and across states. So I think this serves as a really powerful tool for policymakers to use to just kind of understand where's our state, where are our particular pressure points, and how can we best meet them.
Another thing that I think Bill alluded to that we have to pay attention to is in the customer's mind, the two most valuable education pathways are the associate degrees and the postgraduate degrees. Both ends of the educational spectrum, both ends of the cost spectrum. One is lower cost, one's really high cost, but boy, they have a lot in common when you think about it. They are career focused, they are purposeful. They usually have a very straight pathway. If you start here, you're going to end here. And I think we need to think about how do we organize post-high school education, the bachelor's degree in particular, along those same kind of concepts. So I think there's just a lot to think about here with these data. And the other thing you said, Michael, is like, this is so commonplace in other sectors. If you bought a coffee at Starbucks before you got to this meeting, I bet you anything, the server said, could you fill out this survey and let me know how we did today? Or if you stayed at a hotel last night, you didn't get 5 feet from the desk before that you got an email or a text message saying, how'd we do? But that's been missing in education. So listening to the consumer is in itself an important strategy.
And I think that goes back to, and this is something we've talked a lot about with states, how we finance and fund and how we look at outcomes and measure those. So Mushtaq, I want to turn to you now, kind of similar question. Lay out for us kind of what ACE has been focused on, what your work has been focused on, and how it connects to these discussion points. Carol laid out, what's not too big an ask, redesigning post-high school.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here with Carol and with Kim and with you, Michael. But before I start, let me tell you, Carol, a story. So
I love stories.
sitting down to dinner with my wife and kids a couple of weeks ago, and the home phone rings. And
Oh no.
we never pick up the home phone, right? Like our cell phone, sure, the home phone, we only have it, frankly, because it's like set up to our alarm system, you know, and so we
Right.
have to have it. But for some reason, I picked up the phone. And who was it but Strada and Gallup.
A testimonial. A testimonial.
And Bill is right. It took 13 minutes. Timed it. And it was great. I was very excited to take it. I've never been polled before. I felt very special.
That's funny. I've never been, as many of these sessions I've done with people, I've never had anybody come up and tell me they've actually been interviewed. Well, can we take your picture and put it on our next report?
Okay, so Vice President, American Council of Education, we represent something like, depending on the day, something like 1,400 colleges and universities around the country. 4 years, 2 years, privates, publics, mostly not-for-profits, a couple of for-profits. But basically the big and wide gamut of higher education. I come to this question about sort of this connection between jobs and education with a couple of hats. So most recently before this, I was a professor and a dean at Georgetown Law School. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about sort of these questions about how to get the students I taught and the students just generally at the law school jobs after graduation. Before that, I was at the Department of Education with Kim. I was chief of staff in the undersecretary's office, so I come at this also with like a little bit of a policy background. And the way I think about this conundrum about fixing sort of education to work is in, I say, 3 buckets of issues, problems. So the first, I think, is identifying the needs of the workforce. 2 is aligning our curriculum, our learning to those needs. And then 3, actually helping students get those credentials, get that degree. So I'm going to say a couple things that you guys already know that help sort of frame how we think about this. One, as you guys know, the average age of a college student now is about 26. About 43% of our students nationally are part-time. 64% of them are working while they're learning. 40% or so are first generation. And about 40 million are in this bucket that we've talked so much about already, some college, no degree. So these are the sorts of folks that I think we really need to recognize are the students of today. It's not just the 18 to 22-year-olds. I think everybody knows that, but I almost always start every talk just reminding everybody of those numbers. So let's go to those 3 sort of areas that I think about. First, identifying the needs of the labor market. And you would think that would be sort of the easy part. And I think sometimes folks in the education policy sphere sometimes forget how difficult that really is. It's hard to know what jobs are out there. How many welding jobs do we really need in Tallahassee, Florida in 2020? Hard to know. I mean, and I'll tell you that from the institutional perspective, that question and answer is not immediately clear. We don't have great data sources, great insight from industry about how many people should we be entering into some of these programs? How many people should we expect to be able to get jobs afterwards? So, that sense of what the industry needs, not always visible to colleges and universities. And I really think that this is one of those places where states and governors can really be helpful, providing that bridge between industry and schools. One of the things that's also really hard is, so how many welding jobs do we need in 2020 in Tallahassee? That's one question. How many do we need in 2030? And how many do we need in 2040? Because that also should impact, right, which degrees people are trying to go get. That's really not that clear. So that's sort of conundrum number 1. The second is this aligning learning to those jobs. Also, like a little bit easier said than done, and having now been sort of both administration and faculty, I sort of get it, right? Faculty know the stuff they know. I was a federal prosecutor for a long time, so I can teach criminal law, and I can teach it. I can teach it regardless of whether or not DC needs any criminal defense attorneys or prosecutors in the next couple of years. I think they will, but like either way, I'm sort of going to end up teaching it. On the other hand, I think I'm actually fairly optimistic on this score because I think that our internal data has shown that colleges and universities are really getting it, that what the public cares about is employment. And they care about both employment, that first job out of school, they also care about employment 20 years out. And so I think that the administration has gotten the message, and I think that's starting to really get down to faculty. We need to teach stuff that is going to lead to jobs, both the first job and the 20-year out job. And so I think that faculty and the administration are ready to sort of adjust what they're teaching. Now we just need a little bit of help figuring out what that thing is that we need to go teach, right? And so I think that's where industry really can come in and help. So, industry can come in and help us design curriculum, can help us figure out what those bridges are. And we're seeing that in pockets around the country. There are great success stories sort of everywhere, but we need to sort of really increase that. And then the third sort of bucket, and I'll stop talking because you really want to hear from Kim, you don't want to hear from me, is this idea of getting people across the finish line, really getting people to complete. And when we were at the Department of Education, Arnie Duncan, our secretary for most of the time during the Obama administration, used to say, we have a completion problem in this country. So we've not solved the access problem, not at all, but we're doing better on access. We are not doing nearly as well as we need to on completion. There's lots of stuff that we could be doing better, we're starting to do, but we need to be thinking about things like credit for prior learning, better, we really need to solve this transfer problem, better articulation agreements. We've got all sorts of ways in which big data can help. So, things around predictive analytics. And then there's a whole set of funding questions that I hope that we can talk about, but things like Summer Pell. And most importantly, for the folks that are in this room, please don't cut funding for higher education in your state budgets. It's a huge issue that we saw a ton about in the federal sphere. And those cuts get passed right on to the consumer, right on to the students, and it just makes it that much harder for those students to complete. So let me stop. But those are the buckets that I think about when I think about sort of.
I think that makes so much sense, and you really wrapped it up pretty nicely. I've often observed there's a bit of a challenge between kind of short-term needs that we hear so loudly from the private sector, and then you look at long-term predictions on, well, what are the skills people need to succeed into the future? And it's more things like cross-systems thinking, creativity, the types of skills that are very difficult to automate and for machines to do. Yeah. So how we try and meet both of those needs at the same time is really the first person who can figure that out very well is going to be well positioned, I think. So Kim, you're in the trenches every day doing this work. Tell us, what's the environment like in Louisiana today, and what are some of the things you're working on to work with the institutions in your state to make progress on these issues?
Sure, thank you so much for the opportunity. Great to be on this panel. I would say a couple of things, both for Louisiana and also reflecting on Colorado. States are at their best when we have an opportunity to have a vibrant economy, and investing in our people is how we get there. And so I do think that this is a structural redesign conversation for states. How do we blur lines between K-12 and higher ed and workforce is very important. Not waiting, not higher ed saying, well, if you get here, we're ready to serve you, but reaching out and seeing the K-12 environment as an extension of the post-secondary environment. And knowing that students will be college and career ready in high school because they have a college and career experience in high school. Mm-hmm. These are the kinds of structural redesigns that I think that are critical and will help us to accelerate the kinds of opportunities that we want to see so that more people can avail themselves in a knowledge economy. Louisiana, as you know, is a poor state. 1 in 5 people live in poverty in Louisiana. Half of our working population has a high school diploma or less. And so we care deeply about how do you educate and upskill and allow people to participate in the knowledge economy, knowing that the future is now. When you go to visit a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a McDonald's, or there are no people anymore, right? It's automated. And so what is happening to the displacement of workers, and how fast is that happening in a state like Louisiana and so many other states? So we have a sort of both and approach, right? We're thinking about the 42,000 students who graduate high school every year, and trying to, yesterday we had a joint meeting with the Department of Education and the Superintendent of Education, and we committed to work on developing a goal for how many students should graduate high school with a credential. That's an important step and an important signal for our students in Louisiana, that we expect the high school diploma to not be enough for you, and we want you to know that on day one. But we also obviously are thinking about how do you understand the time and the money challenges and the relevance challenges and the childcare and transportation challenges for this enormous adult population that will be displaced or is being displaced each and every day in our state. So I'm very committed to that work. We're concerned about how to address that. One of the things that I think is helpful for us in Louisiana, and I know Carol has had a chance to visit with our great governor, he has developed an education and workforce sub-cabinet. And so all the talent developers in Louisiana sit together, meet, and he's attended 3 of our 4 meetings so far to talk about how to ensure more people have a credential of value. So K-12 and higher ed at the table, juvenile and adult corrections are at the table, housing is at the table, children and family services, because they have foster youth and TANF and SNAP, Medicaid, Department of Health is at the table. So when you think about these policy challenges and solutions as a cohort, if you will, of talent developers for a state, you can be you can be laser focused on these opportunities. We started with a conversation around how to leverage public benefits to completion. So CLASP came in to do some work for us on that. Our next meeting in the next week or 2 is going to be around foster youth. We just extended the law extended the age for students to stay, foster youth to stay within the state system. But we need to make sure in middle school we're looking at aptitude and interest so that they can be on their way to a credential. Then we will talk about prison education reform, because we've had bipartisan support for prison education. Over 80% of our population that's incarcerated will go back home. So they need to go back stronger and better than they came into the system. So this is how we think about talent in Louisiana broadly, and how we think about talent development, I think, has to evolve as well. So we're a state where over 90% of our working population is Louisiana homegrown. Colorado is a state, of course, that is a talent importer. Louisiana, one of the lowest educational attainment states in the nation. Colorado, one of the highest. And so when you invest in your people, you see, when you invest in human capital, you see what can happen in terms of building a strong economy. I think in both places, we had opportunities to talk about blurring lines between K-12, higher ed, and workforce. In both places, we had an opportunity to directly engage business, to ask, what are you looking for, and how do we ensure that we get closer to market relevance with internships and co-ops and apprenticeships. The great apprenticeship work that's happening in Colorado, youth apprenticeship, white collar, was very important. And I had an apprentice in my office, 16 years old. She went to high school 3 days a week, worked with us 2 days a week, signed a 3-year contract, made $10,000 a year training wage, and will graduate high school with a credential. That is what the future of education and employment looks like. Very intentional design, very aligned, and moving the work forward in a very rapid way. So I'm excited about the opportunity. I do think that states are where the action is in a lot of this work. I do think that governors are concerned and committed to this work, but navigating this system redesign is an important conversation. How do we get it right, and how do we push against the system so that we're not trying to pilot our way out of it, because we won't get there with pilots. We need to go at scale. And we need to really think about how to move the system more rapidly and more closely to what the market needs.
I have about 8,000 questions because you laid out so many important issues. I'll start with, I was reading an article to just kind of drive home, like, this is affecting people now and today. I was reading an article about, many of you may know Walmart has been experimenting and deploying robotic units inside their stores to do a number of tasks. They were talking to one store associate who said, yeah, we named this janitorial robot Rob because that's the name of the guy who they fired who had this job. So, you know, this is real for so many people across America. And I kind of want to open this up to the panel too and dive in on the question of scale particularly. You mentioned work-based learning. That's a strategy we've been working with a lot of states on. How do we get more opportunities for apprenticeships and internships that connects learning in a classroom with working on a job and a pathway forward? And one of the biggest challenges is, at the end of the day, those types of programs are about a relationship between kind of one company and one learner and one educational institution. So scale has been a huge challenge for so many states. I really want to hear your all's thoughts on, you know, when solutions have to be tailored and localized, how do we achieve scale in that environment when we know that big top-down programs seem less likely to work in kind of this new environment of work? Real easy one.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that the engagement and the mobilization of the workforce, the companies, business and industry, I think is very important. Mm-hmm. And so is the expectation for, as I mentioned, the K-12 environment. So if we believe, as I know we do in this room, that the knowledge economy means the high school diploma is the floor, not the ceiling, then that means in America, every high school graduate needs to have a credential beyond high school. And every adult needs to have that credential as well. So if we think about it as a design assignment of how do you make sure that everyone has this opportunity, good consumer information, good business engagement, an opportunity to have an affordable credential of value, then I think you have this responsibility to say to the business community, how do you assist us? How can we make sure that you're all in? And here's a menu of ways that you can engage, but we need everyone engaged because it's not a one-off assignment, it's not a one-off solution, it's an all-in solution. So I think that sort of mindset, that signaling, that communication, that engagement has to be that broad and that deep, and the expectation needs to be sent that you're part of the solution, we need you. We need your engagement.
You know, I think that's exactly the right question. I'd say a couple of things. One, we do know, and Bill Hansen referred to this as well, that when you have work-based experiences, the consumer sees more value in that experience, and that's what employers are really looking for. So strategies that facilitate that, in our state of Indiana, they require now every high school student to have a work-based experience before they leave high school.
Right.
And I said to our Commissioner of Higher Education, if she's watching, she is going to kill me, but hope she's not. But we have a law in Indiana that says all bachelor degrees have to be 120 credits. And I said to her, what would happen if we said, oh, and 20% of those have to be work-based learning? That would be game changer, right? Because then every college would have to figure out, how do I get that done with my employers? And you made a statement that, you know, it's really difficult to learn what the jobs are in the future and what the skills are. You know, every state sort of has a rudimentary way of doing this. Strada itself owns a company, MZ, that does this very well. They go at the skill level, not just the job level. But boy, if you're going to really try to address the skills needed for employers, talk about a redesign.
Right.
Because that's redoing the whole curriculum, that's working with your employers, because institutions of higher ed are not going to be able to do that on their own. They're going to need employers to help with that skill development.
Exactly.
So first of all, I would say to states, understand the skills that are needed by regions in your state, because not every state has one economy, one set of jobs, one sector. And then redesign the curriculum to meet those skills. MZ's one way. There's lots of probably ways to do it, but it's got to get down to that level. And we're working with ACE, actually, to get that done. How fun is that going to be?
It's going to be great. And I think
So you're the solution.
I think this point is really an important one, that that designing for the job is actually not only difficult, but also probably not the right way to think about it when we know that the nature of work is changing so quickly, right? So that, you know, the folks that are in this room, I see a lot of young faces, are likely to have 12 or 15 or 20 jobs over the course of their career, right? And not 2 or 3. So like designing for a job, well, what job are we really designing for? That first one. So this idea of identifying the skills is right. And one place where I'm really pretty optimistic that we can make a lot of progress is in the idea of learning outcomes in your curriculum, right? So now when I teach a class, I say these are the 5 skills I want you to learn. This is what I hope you're going to get out of it. And so it's going to be close to reading the case book, sure, but it's also going to be, I want you to be able to get up on your feet and be able to make an argument. You know, I want you to be able to collaborate with your, you know, with your peers. And if I were even a better professor, I'd have even like more detailed learning outcomes. But once we get to the point where we're talking about skills and then can figure out how to stack those skills to create a credential and then stack those credentials so that you can go to an employer and say, I can do X, Y, and Z on day 1, and then make it so that, you know, we're not just doing X, Y, and Z, but you're learning X plus 1 and X plus 2 over time so that we can do this lifetime learning. I think that's where the future of all of this is.
I would say that I would add to the skills conversation, the relevance conversation. So as I visited schools and visited students in both states, I've asked them, what's the secret sauce to student success? And they always say basically the same thing, regardless of the type of institution or location. 1, I feel comfortable here. I feel like I have a sense of place. 2, someone knows me by name and face and cares if I'm successful. And 3, relevance to my time and money to the world of work, right? I see a connection between what I'm doing and what I want to do. Yesterday we had Tristan Dinley in our state visiting and talking about his mindset study he's done in Georgia, a survey of mindset, a mindset exercise for every freshman in Georgia. And he showed the correlation between students' retention, successful retention, and their understanding of the relevance of what they were studying. And I've also seen an article written where faculty say, not just these are the learning objectives, but these are the relevant skills that you're going to learn in this class to what you want to do. And the impact of that statement, that relevant statement, that intentional connection of relevance to the outcomes for students is really proven. And so we need to, I think, lean into the skills and the communication of the relevance of those skills.
Let me just say, Kim, you're so right on. When you listen to consumers, the #1 predictor of whether they think they had a valuable experience is how relevant was it to my career goals.
Right.
And so that relevance is the key word. And so it's not hard to do, but it's a redesign, and it's a different way of thinking about teaching skills. And it doesn't mean that every faculty member has to become a labor market expert. It means making the connection, even something as simple as saying to a student, you know, you're a good writer, and writing is so important today in the workforce. And here's the different ways writing is used. We know from the Gallup work, that signals to the student, I'm being prepared, this is relevant to my future, and this faculty person in this institution cares about my future.
That's right.
You all set me up perfectly for my next question. Y'all make it so easy for me. And I want to talk about whose job is it to figure out that connection and to bring the relevance into the classroom. Again, going back to a lot of the work-based learning conversations, there's not a ready cadre of people inside institutions or across state government who are able to translate and kind of speak the world of education and learning, and also speak the world of industry and in-demand skills and careers. So how do you all think a state or a governor could approach kind of building that class of people who can be that connective tissue for learners? And you know, what are the ways we can help states do that?
Well, you're going to figure that out.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have some ideas. I mean, and truly, Kim, you know, what you were laying out, that Governor Bryant's kind of talent cabinet, and we've seen a couple of states, Indiana and a few others, take that same approach, getting the right actors in the room to have one conversation and then build out a set of strategies with the thinking that it then filters down to institutions and into classrooms and to parents and families. But
Yes, I mean, I think the workforce cabinet is certainly one way to do that. I think, there are a lot of people who are in this work, and I think that for us to think about this as solely education and employment we're missing the community organizations and the faith organizations and so many other NGOs that are engaged in this work. And so regardless of where you are in the puzzle of trying to figure out how to advance talent development, I think it's important to say it's on us to try to connect the tissue. It's on us to try to make sure that this recipe for success is shared. This idea of relevance, this idea of workforce engagement, listening, the student voice, the consumer voice, engaging business and industry. I have a board member, a number of my board members are business leaders, but there's one who was a former Senate president. And every time we have academic programs that we approve, he asks the same question: how do we know that what they're learning in this program is market relevant? How do we know that? And so we've been in conversations about deep dive around specific disciplines and skills with employers, bringing employers and provosts and deans, or deans and department heads into a room to talk and to hear from each other, sort of a reverse fishbowl, where the business and industry is in the fishbowl talking about the skills that you need for engineering or STEM, whatever it may be, with deans and department heads listening, and then reversing the fishbowl, because those are communities that do not talk with each other, right? You don't have access to that. But these kinds of intentional examples where you could have a statewide initiative to bring people in who are working on a particular discipline that you want to lean into, like IT or STEM, engineering, welding, whatever it may be, gives you an opportunity to hear directly from the people who are hiring your students and to hear directly from the people who are preparing your students. And that conversation doesn't currently happen at scale. So I do think that it's on us to think about how to make those connections occur and then how to share the learning. But I know this is also a grant opportunity, so maybe others will have other ideas that'll be part of this as well.
So Carol and Kim, so when I hear you guys talk about relevance, it seems right, of course. But I worry a lot about the liberal arts. Right, and so ACE has been doing survey data too, and we know that the public has sort of a mixed view of the liberal arts. Right now, if you ask the American public about or at least when we did, about their favorability ratings for STEM degrees, is something like 80% favorable. Business degrees, 75% favorable. Liberal arts, 43, 44. Right, but we know that some of that broad-based learning is very important.
Exactly right. 15,
20, I mean, probably 5 years out, but certainly, it's hard to sort of move up in the world with only a welding certificate credential if what you want to do is go be the CEO of a company. So what is your data telling you, and how do you guys think about sort of demonstrating the relevance of liberal arts degrees?
Well, a couple of things we've done. We produced a report with MZ and our Institute for the Future of Work. It's on our website. It's Robot Ready. And what MZ has done is track what really happens to liberal arts graduates as they go through their careers.
Yes.
And it's very fascinating. Yes. And I think that institutions, colleges and universities should read it because it gives you some insights that it's very valuable skills that the liberal arts are acquiring and how they maneuver through their different careers. And we also know that if you couple that liberal arts education with a work experience, that could be a very powerful accelerator to the career.
That's right.
So it's not an either or. And too often we tend to think, liberal arts or a vocational field. And that is not the way employers look at it, and it's not the way the world actually works. So I would commend that report to you, Robot Ready.
I would say ditto. When you ask what are the skills what are foundational skills, they talk about the skills that are liberal arts, right? This critical thinking, this idea to make an argument, understanding humanities, all of these things that are important. Obviously now lots of conversations about digital literacy. So I do think that, you know, you may have a label of liberal arts and people say, well, what is that? Unless you have a liberal arts degree, then you say it rocks. But, right? Because you get to go and do so many amazing things. So much of the talent that I have in my offices over time have been liberal arts majors, plus the certificate, or plus the opportunity, or plus the workforce experience. But I do think we have to talk about these foundational skills, as you mentioned, Mushtaq, for a lifetime. Not just the first degree, but to the 5th degree and the 7th degree. And how are these skills going to be foundational for you moving forward? So we have to elevate that, and we have to talk about these liberal arts skills as market relevant skills.
Well, the Robot Ready report talks about them as human skills.
Yes.
To differentiate them from things that the robot and Walmart can do.
Exactly.
But it's those human skills that will keep someone competitive
Yes,
in
and
their
employers.
careers.
That's right.
And so it's very important. Brandon Bustede, maybe some of you heard him talk over the years. He was at Gallup, now with Kaplan. And he used to say, they did some research on the term liberal arts with young people who are thinking about college. And the young people would say, well, I don't think that's for me. I'm not liberal and I don't like the arts. So maybe it's a branding issue we ought to think about.
Yeah, exactly. It's how do we combine both together? Speaking as a former music major, so
Look where you are.
And
I know, and look at me now.
Changing
Look at me
the
now.
world.
Changing the world. So I have one final question, and then I do want to open it up to the audience because we have a lot of smart folks in the audience who I know have good questions. Imagine that, you know, there were a bunch of governors in the room, that everyone here was a governor. Kind of what would your compact advice be to them, you know, if they're interested in making progress and improving the lives of their citizens? What are the 2 or 3 things they could really focus on to make that change in a short time frame that governors have to operate in?
Well, I would advise them to look at the data, the analysis of the skills, of the demand, and align it with the skills of the supply, and look to see how aligned those are and where the gaps are. I would also say that, you know, you need to leverage your resources so that you are targeting consumers where they're at. This one-size-fits-all solution does not work. And so take the demographics and look at where they are. Most of those students you talked about are already working. They're on a path. So how do you work with their employers, their career aspirations, and break the one-size-fits-all model that Bill talked about that was 1950, not 2050. And so spark innovation so that you're meeting the consumer where they are.
So I think I'd say 3 things. One is also about data. So, you know, one of the things that was so frustrating in the federal government is we don't have a federal student unit record system. And so we couldn't track students in the ways that I think we want. States are doing all sorts of interesting things and can do really interesting things around the data about who their students are, you know, what they've learned, especially tracking these folks that have some college, no degree. So I'd unlock as much of that data as possible, because I would have loved to have worked at a state, or at least had access to that state data when we were in the federal government. I think it's incredible. 2, I think, you know, to the extent that you are in a state that doesn't have strong articulation agreements between 2 years and 4 years, I think that's stuff that absolutely needs to get fixed. And as you're fixing it, remember that it's much more complicated than just the 2 to 4. Now everybody's moving in all sorts of different ways. 2 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 2, 4 to credential. So I mean, I think, you know, really thinking about that, that question about sort of what transfer looks like, spend some time there. And then 3rd, the one word that we haven't used, I think, at all today is accountability, right? And so one of the things that's really tricky about moving to a world in which you've got shorter term credentials is that it makes it easy for actors that aren't quite as good to be able to access some of your very precious resources. So make sure that your state authorizing agencies are doing what they need to do and are, you know, are unlocked to be able to make sure that, that consumers are protected, and that, you know, you're working with your accreditors to make sure that only good quality programs are getting that that really, really valuable money, both from the consumer perspective, but also your state dollars?
So I would say, probably ditto on these. I would say analyze, right, around the data, prioritize, and then use your power to convene to drive good work. Because governors have a big megaphone, they have a big platform, they have cabinets, and so where they put the spotlight is where the action is, and measure it, right? See how you're doing, and be accountable and be intentional about looking to see how things are coming along. What we don't want the governors to do is to think about this in incremental change. What we want them to think about is how big and how fast can we go in a state, because time is the enemy. We've got to get this done. We've got to make sure we get this done. And I will also put on the table the significant equity gaps that we see, both in Louisiana with African American populations, in Colorado with Hispanic populations. The states that are working are not working for everyone, so we have a responsibility to look at the subgroups, to ask why it's not happening, and to be intentional about designing to erase gaps as well.
Absolutely right. They don't go away without focus and
That's right.
attention and constantly asking uncomfortable questions even. And I'll add one to myself, and then I want to hear questions from you guys, is I think there's a big opportunity. If you look at employer investments in education and training, they have been declining both in overall dollars and also the number of students that are being supported. We also see that kind of private sector investments overwhelmingly go to students who are already, or adults who are already pretty well educated. So I think governors have an opportunity to challenge their business leaders to be kind of, as Martin said, co-investors, not just partners. Right. Both providing their knowledge of what they need, but also stepping up to the plate to, I think as we were saying earlier, invest in human capital. It has to happen from all sides, because at the end of the day, we succeed or not as a society by human capital.
That's right.
So I'm glad we've answered every single question, but in case there were others out there that we hadn't gotten to, I do want to see. So raise your hand, don't be shy. I have other questions I can go to if you aren't. Martin.
Kim, you said the time is now to act, and Bill said there has to be bold action. So I'd like to hear from each of you. What would be a bold action that's in the purview of governors that they could take now that would help move this along?
So one thing I would say is that, to this idea, Wichita put on the table about short-term certificates and quality. I do think that we do see governors that are investing in high-demand short-term certificates to get people on the first rung of their opportunity. So I would say prioritize your investment towards where you're trying to go, and make sure it's market relevant as well. So all the governors are thinking about workforce and education, but they have limited resources and limited window of time to get things done. So wherever your priority will be, I would say that use your dollars wisely and your time wisely.
One of the things that I think, is the privilege of a governor is to be able to oversee both K-12 and higher ed. And, I'm very interested in this idea about dual enrollment and about how to unlock the juniors and seniors of high school and start them thinking about these questions about credentials, workplace learning. If you get it started early, I think that's really helpful. And I think that's a place where K-12 and higher ed don't talk as much as they sometimes can. I think governors can force that conversation and should.
We were visiting a governor recently. I won't name the governor, but the governor did something very bold I'm not going to use a gender, but in their first year, and it was really looking at the programs that were not producing the numbers of people needed to fuel the economy of that state. The governor defunded those programs and asked the employers to co-invest in programs that would help build the talent pipeline. Now that sent do not do this at home out there on your first day of your first term, but it's a bold action.
Right.
But at least know where those disconnects are. And are you putting your resources year after year into programs that are not producing a talent pipeline?
Right.
And if you are, have a plan to stop it.
Right.
And I think that goes back to the power of data, to be able to say, this isn't us not liking you as a program or an institution. This is, you want to do the best by your community, and the data's telling us that we need to change things if we're going to do that. And it allows you to kind of step back and have those what are normally very difficult conversations. And, Mushtaq, to build on your point, we often try to talk to states about this whole kind of continuum of thinking about learning and life and careers, thinking about career awareness at the younger ages, moving into career exploration, what's out there, how do my skills and interests align with that, and then moving into career preparation. And I don't know if we found kind of a lower end on when you can start having those types of conversations yet across states.
But we're not doing a good job at it at all.
No.
Right? We don't think about students' aptitude and interest to help them in middle school figure out what they're interested in so that in high school they can begin skill building so that they can graduate with a credential. It is relationship driven, based on an engaged parent or an engaged teacher. So some kids get a lot of it and some kids get very little.
I think, Kim, you raised a really good, you keep saying measure aptitude and interest. That's really interesting and important because it's both.
Right.
And we do advising in this country, by and large, some states out there maybe do it well, very poorly.
Yes.
And we know that from our own report. The second report we did from our Gallup was, where do you get your advice? Mm-hmm. Who do you listen to? Mm-hmm. And so good advising, I think, is another thing that maybe states should think about investing in. It's aptitude and interest. That's another tough conversation.
That's right.
Well, if you want to talk about reducing high school dropout rates, get them engaged in something they're passionate about.
Right.
Relevant.
Have supported that's relevant.
Right. That's right.
Exactly.
Look at us.
We've got it all figured out.
Check, check, check. Okay, we have one question right here.
Hi. So what do you do about state leaders and states that say things like, to Kim's amazing comment about blurring the lines in this whole discussion, we're doing that. We've already done that. Oh my gosh, of course we've got a workforce connection to community college, to higher ed, to certificates. I see that and hear it over and over again, and I wonder if that's going to be the biggest barrier to making this succeed.
Well, they can say it, but you can say, but what do the numbers say? Right? I mean, we certainly hear people say all the time, we're doing that. And then you can say, but what do the numbers look like? How are students doing? What is there? How do we know that we're doing, to my board member's question, how do we know that they're relevant? How do we know that that's happening? And can't we do more? And so when you think about this exercise as a continuous improvement exercise, as an accelerator for good work, then I think that allows you to sort of break through some of that. Because I do think we have to think about, when you talk about system redesign, this is a big who moved my cheese exercise, right? So we want to win people over to say, this is not about a deficit language for you. This is not about you did something wrong. Then the economy's changed. So we have to go faster and better and stronger, and we need you to be engaged in that.
I hear you. I think I hear stuff like that all the time. And not just in education, but like in all facets. Like, yeah, we do that. And I think, my response generally to something like that is, that's awesome. Let's scale all of the amazing things you're doing and let's bring it all, to the rest of the state too. So, to Kim's point, try to turn it a little bit positive and then turn it to the scale question.
What I say is, show me the data. How many unfilled jobs then? You must have like very few unfilled jobs in this state. You must be killing it. Then show me the data. As Bill and my former boss used to say, in God we trust, all others bring data.
That makes me think of kind of the flip side of that which we often hear in states, which is not one more thing, or initiative fatigue. And so I think governors have to be really mindful. What did my predecessor do? What initiatives are already underway? How can I? Yes, I need to get reelected, so I may rebrand it. But how can I build on work that's already been done, or help accelerate, or what's often very hard in state government is deciding when to stop doing something.
Yeah.
So it's really complex, and it takes a lot of thought to be able to think about, okay, what do I need to build that's new? What do we need to stop doing? And then how do I leverage and align everything we're already doing with where I want to go?
Right.
Get the, any over here? Okay.
So I had been thinking a lot about the question of relevancy, and you said, you know, folks looking back feel that they had more value if it was relevant to their career, and just what we started to touch on earlier of how do we start those conversations with families, communities, advising counselors in the K-12 space. And I was just wondering if we could spend a little bit more time, if you have any best practices or groups that you think are crucial to engage for the governors and for those in the states who may be listening about who's, you know, when we talk about those fish bowls and getting those right people in the room, who does that represent on the family, community, and K-12 level?
So it's interesting that you asked that question. When I was working in Colorado, we wanted to bring together people who were advocates for post-secondary education, and I asked, as a new head of higher ed, you know, who's doing this work? And of course, you had the college access groups. I shout out to Kim and her teams. But, you know, it was sort of crickets other than that. If you say, who's advocating for quality K-12 in your state, you need an arena to fill it in with all the people. So one of the things that we thought about was, how do you leverage K-12 advocates into post-secondary advocates, right? To say, we want an experience that's solid for K-12, but it's not going to get you job ready. The high school diploma doesn't do that anymore. So how do you take all of those communities of parent advocates and faith advocates and community leaders and teacher groups, all of those folks, to really talk to them about what we're trying to do? I think that's the opportunity that we have. Try to leverage that opportunity so that the high school is an extension of post-secondary. Therefore, the advocates for K-12 become an extension as well.
It's a great question. I don't have good answers, but I would think about tackling it via guidance counselors and teachers unions. And on the teachers unions, I think it's partially because you know, if you can have folks in high school feel like their education is relevant, it'll make them happier, it'll make them happier with their teachers, and so it's really, I think it's, those two places are avenues I would try to engage.
On the advising side, the report we did on where do you get good advice, the least source of career advice for young people, and this was in high school, was the counselor.
I know.
But the good news is that peers was the top choice, which could be good or bad, because if your peers don't know much, you're not going to get really good advice. Teachers. Believe it or not, young people listen to their teachers. And so how do we equip teachers to really help make this connection? And then the other most valued source of advice, but least used, was either my employer or someone I know who works in a field I'm interested in. And if you think about this, especially low-income families and students, honestly, sadly, they may not know anyone who works. No one in their family, maybe no one in their neighborhood. And they're the least dependent on most dependent on good advice, and maybe have the least access. And that's why work is so important, because work teaches you what you're good at, what you like, and employers find talent in you. And if an employer said, wow, you know, I see a natural ability in you to do such and such, that is so powerful to a young person. Right. And that is why work and relevance is so important. If I think about my first job, and I'm probably the oldest one here as I look around, I mean, I was in an ice cream store. So I learned early on, working with the general public was not going to be for me. But work experiences teaches you about yourself, and you help find your sense of purpose. And so exposing people to work and people who do work is so important. And so that's why we say relevance and work-based experience.
That rings very true for me. I got to where I am because I had a long stream of internships. And it worked for me because I came from a background of privilege and could do unpaid internships and make connections, and I had all sorts of social capital but that many people do not have access to. The other thing I want to build on from what we were saying about, well, who needs to be around the table. One strategy we've been having conversations with states on, and Colorado is actually a state that does this very well, is thinking what we call kind of a two-generation approach. Students who are in a classroom, they have parents. Those parents are working or maybe not, but they're engaged with work. They maybe are attending school themselves. It's thinking holistically about how are we designing programs and services for people who are part of a web of connections and networks, and they bring a whole suite of social capital, or maybe they don't, as we were just discussing. So how do we make sure we're bringing in those human services programs as appropriate, and those community networks, and the whole kind of panoply of folks who are touching people's lives that the state has kind of authority over. We got one up here. We're getting John's exercise in today.
Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment for Carol. When you were having that conversation with Teresa about the 20% for...
You had to bring that up again.
Well, I know the commissioner of your state, so it's kind of, but I was looking at my college transcript the other day, and I can track 20% of my credits to the 5 internships I did during college.
Wow. Where was this?
University of Florida.
University of Florida.
Yeah, but it wasn't a natural thing. I had to really go out.
It wasn't
and work.
intentional on their part.
Well, I mean, I had an internship on Capitol Hill, and it was in space policy, and so I went to the astronomy department, and I got a professor to give me 2 credits of graduate level work for writing a paper about NASA.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's some good self-advocacy right there.
Yeah.
I'm just impressed you could find your college transcript.
And took the time to analyze
I even have it, because you don't really own those things. It's a whole other conversation.
Well, yeah,
Why we can't own our own transcripts, I don't know.
It's online.
Oh, it's online.
But the question I have, and if I remember the survey where you were looking at what people thought they needed in terms of higher education, and I think South Dakota was that 20-ish state. How do you convince people that they need to have higher education to make this initiative work? You have to have public buy-in that they need it in the first place. And so in the South Dakotas of our nation, what needs to be done?
For the record, I did not call out South Dakota. I didn't. It's easy because people will act in their own self-interest, and they're interested in their career advancement. And so you've got to make the connection for why would you want to upskill. It can't be just this generic, you all come and in 5 years you may earn an associate degree or a bachelor degree. You've got to show the path. That's why the most valued sources of advice are associate degrees and post-grad. They're very purposeful. They're very intentional. And so that's why the states that are going to succeed in this are the ones that don't build a one-size strategy fits all, but it's related to the economic development of your region, it's related to the skills that are needed in your region, and you make the connection to those adults. Adults will act in their own self-interest, very specifically in their own self-interest.
Yeah. I think there's I think people generally get that the economy is changing and that they need to change with it. The challenge is we don't clearly, particularly if you're an adult, lay out how you go and do that. Particularly for people who, as you said, maybe they have some college no degree, they're not very likely to go back because they had a bad experience. So thinking about how do we communicate and lay out pathways to reach out to these folks who know that they probably need to find a different pathway.
And I think it goes to you, Kim, I love the phrase, the redesign, because I was a chancellor of a community college, and when an adult did come to our doors for retraining, the first thing that we did, now this was a decade or so ago, but the first thing that we did was give them a math placement test.
Right.
And most of those adults hadn't taken math for 20 years. And like, okay, I'm out. What would be the purpose of this? Now I'm taking algebra now. And they just. So we've got to redesign the system with the adult and the consumer in mind. They've had life experience, and this is what another thing we're going to be doing with your organization is really how do you transfer that life experience
That's right, yeah.
into academic credentials. and let them know they've had some success in their life.
Yeah, and I saw on the sheet that I think Credential Engine is here, and maybe Credly is either here.
Yeah.
You know, and they're doing amazing work, and I think this is exactly right. I mean, for our adult learners who are trying to come back, one of the huge barriers is things like math, because nobody likes math. But also just generally like being able to get credit for the work both in class that they've done and also out of class. And we just, I mean, this is on institutions of higher ed. I mean, we just need to do a better job here. And there are pockets of places that are doing wonderfully, and there's some investments that we need to be able to, I think, really do this even better.
Right.
So I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. We got one here, and then we'll end right here.
So, and yes, Pat Leonard from Credly. Kind of 2 points to this. Absolutely, in terms of the stakeholders that we're talking about here, the person in the middle is the individual who is learning from a whole host of kind of sources, and this really is an epic change management initiative for all stakeholders. Everybody's got to take a step towards the middle. And we hear more and more as we're doing credentials of individuals appreciating that they need to learn at the speed of business, and that's not necessarily understandable for most people because it's changing so quickly. And how do we arm people to be an HR department of one? Because you're going to have 12 jobs and you're going to have all that kind of thing. So how much earlier might we be able to introduce that notion of you need to be able to advocate for yourself? So that's excellent comments in that space. The question I had was, and this gets back to the governor's role, time and again we hear academic institutions at least have a rubric. They've got a framework of accreditors to be able to use as a framework for what they're needing to be able to do. Employers, not so much. And oftentimes we have no challenge in bringing the educators to the table of saying, gosh, we know we need to change. We can see we need the relevancy of the kind of programs that we're doing. It is incredibly difficult to get the employers to the table. And unfortunately, the employer that usually comes is the CEO or someone at a senior level. They're not at the touch point of hiring. So this whole notion in terms of being able to teach employers how to be able to speak not about this is a job, but rather here's a set of skills I need you to put in your toolkit, because I can't tell you what the next job is going to be in 5 years. We haven't made it up yet.
Right.
So from a governor's chair, what kind of counsel would you suggest in this, scale this up quickly to be able to bring employers to the table in a more structured way, kind of like the accreditation kind of structure that's there for academic, but employers to the table to be able to get a more urgent conversation around skills and competency-based hiring, which you hear a lot about, but really has not taken much traction yet.
So I'll give one example, one Colorado example that was a result of this decision by the governor and the business community in partnership to jump into white collar youth apprenticeship program for students. It was competency-based, skill-focused, and employer-led. And so the first exercise was for the companies, the Pinnacle, the Home Advisors, et cetera, to come to the table and to begin the exercise of articulating what they needed. I think people rally around a challenge. If you say, we're defining what we're trying to get done, and we're not trying to boil the ocean. We make it manageable first so we can figure out how to do it and then move forward. But that was an example in Colorado that worked. And so you do have several hundred students. They want to scale to 10,000. But the exercise was employee-led, skills and competency-based to get that work done.
Just to build on that, I think you've highlighted what is a very important challenge. Most Americans work for small and mid-sized companies, and they don't have the sophistication of a Microsoft or an Amazon to start up their own programs and articulate exactly their needs. So there's a tremendous need for public sector or some kind of action to help them be able to do that. And a lot of it comes down to being able to demonstrate value for the employers to get them engaged and in the door and in that continued relationship. One example I'll turn to is in Montana again. Governor Bullock in his first term launched Main Street Montana, and they created what they called key industry networks for 13 different industries around the state, and each of them were chaired by business leaders in those industries and sectors. And over the course of about a year, they went all over the state, big state, and came up with a list of recommendations for each of these KINs. And then the governor and his administration enacted, dozens and dozens of them. So they were able to prove value to business and then build them in as kind of a network of people they can call on all across the state to make these types of changes, to get their input and buy-in, and it became a very long-term process, which is what it has to be. So one final question. I think we had a hand raised here. Take it away.
So before this began, I had a great conversation with my colleagues here, and we were just talking about how even in what's going on right now in states, in free college initiatives, you actually see the most innovation coming in the adult promise programs as opposed to the ones that are based on the traditional college student. And so how can we, and maybe it's a segue into the next conversation about this new, grant proposal, but how do we leverage these things that are being created for adults to actually serve students who are of a traditional age but are not traditional students? Right. Because there's similar barriers, and I think we bucket adults and then traditional students in these kind of two separate buckets, and we have these equity gaps, and students could really benefit from some of these other things that we're advocating for adults. So just interested in thinking about that and how you think that we can begin to crosswalk adult programs with traditional age students.
Yeah.
Well, even among traditional age college students, 18 to 24, half of them are working anyway. Yes. So this is kind of a false distinction between adult students and other students. I mean, there are students, most of them are working, and they're on a path. Whether we think it's a good path or not doesn't matter. They're committed to doing something. And so, again, it's meeting the consumer where they are, no matter the age. I don't know what you would say about that.
No, I think that's right, and I think this instinct of using what we've learned in other places everywhere, I think seems right. And I also agree. I mean, I think that there's, in the surveys we've done of adult learners, they're not really that different than any other learner. They've got slightly different issues in terms of childcare. And they often will have credits sort of floating around that they'd like to be able to get some credit for, but they're not fundamentally different. And so I think there's a lot of learning that can be used.
Right.
Great. Well, this has been just a fantastic conversation. We could do this probably all day, but I hate standing in between people in reception, so I'm going to toss that over to Amanda. So please join me in thanking our panelists. And so now I'm going to invite Amanda up, who is going to tell us a little bit about what is this opportunity we've been referring to, and then we will head over to the reception after she is finished. We'll do a quick reset. Thank you all so much. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much. You know you've arrived when people come and move everything for you, and you just have to walk up and stand here. Thank you all so much for staying with us through some of these framing conversations. That was an amazing panel, I have to say. It was very engaging and exciting, and I hope it laid the groundwork of kind of the types of things that we're looking to do within this project. So I'll lay out a couple of the details. Some of you picked up a copy of the RFP when you came in. It is also released on our website right now, which is nga.org/educate for opportunity. And there's no "for" in that one. It's you actually write out the word "for," so it's not quite as cool. But so in Educate for Opportunity, we are working with the support of the Strada Education Network to support a cohort of states to better align post-secondary and workforce priorities, especially for adult populations. And I point out the adult populations distinction because we're very excited to be funded in a parallel project to Education Commission of the states. And we have one of their representatives who joined us here today. We're very excited to partner with them through the lives of our projects. You'll hear more about their project being released at their summer meeting this year, but we're both working with this Consumer Insights data. They're going to be focusing more on a youth-focused up to 30 population. So it's a little bit more of a disconnected population, so comes with its own kind of focused challenges, but we'll certainly be connecting those dots throughout the lives of the projects. So when I focus in on the adults piece, it's because you're going to be hearing from some of Strada's funded projects over the next couple of years around a couple different populations and how better to connect education and work. So we are releasing the RFA today, the request for applications. We're trying to engage a cohort of 6 states to work with us across about a 1.5-year period. So when NGA engages with states, we like to do it when we're able to in a way that allows for a deep dive with a cross-cutting team. So in this application, we'll be asking for states to put together some ideas, some strategies, building on their current work. A lot of the things you heard laid out in this panel about, not recreating just another initiative, but really working on alignment, working on scale, working on focusing in on the data, what it's telling you, what your own data is telling you, and then what are some of these new sources of data that you can consider. And that's why the rich partnership with Strada is going to bring us some of that consumer insights data, also some MC data. So the states that are selected will have a rare kind of full insight into a lot of data sources in a deep dive kind of way where they can make better informed policy decisions to meet the needs of these populations. So the application is going to be, a request for applications is going to be out there for a little over about a 1.5 months. Applications are going to be due on August 2nd. Oh. That's weird, I can hear myself. That's great, I sound good. No, it's okay. So the applications are gonna be due August 2nd. We're gonna make a very quick turnaround and select states about within a week or 2 after those applications are all received. So it's gonna move very quickly into the fall. So states who are thinking about that, think about that in your timeline of throwing in this application and then having us reach out and let you know about the decision and then immediately engage you in some of this work in the fall. So a lot of you sitting around the room, I've actually, during the course of this event, received 2 or 3 emails from partners saying, here's some things we have, here's some resources, here's some great connections. I'm excited to start mapping this out and figuring out how we can actually bring you to some of those state convenings, either specific to the state or in some of the cross-cohort conversations. Seriously, Kim, I don't need it back the whole time. Sorry. So the project's going to be implemented in 3 phases. The first one is going to be a super deep dive into data. It's gathering the right people at the table, just like Kim was saying, having the right people in the room, and bringing them all together and looking at data from different angles, and hopefully some new partners in state agencies that they haven't engaged before. A lot of states are thinking across engaging their human services agencies as really supporting attainment and access. Many are looking at their Department of Corrections as a place where they need to go to ease some barriers for specific populations in their state that they want to engage. So we're excited to see the connections that states want to make, the priority areas they have, some of the equity gaps, which we've heard, they differ. I mean, the equity gaps persist across all states, but they focus in different population areas for different state needs. What's exciting about NGA is that we know there's not one size fits all things, and so we want to hear from states what their priorities are, what their approaches are, and then we're able to help them curate the best types of research and support and expertise to help them make the best and strongest policy decisions and program development decisions that they can possibly make. So a couple nuts and bolts before we tie up, just so you're aware of what the structure looks like for states. So NGA Solutions, through this project, will be providing technical assistance and grants of $100,000 to each of the states who are selected. And then another element, which I think is super exciting, which was part of a collaborative conversation with Strada Education Network, was we are going to provide for the states that are selected at the midpoint of the grant additional kind of strategy grants, innovation grants. So once you've gotten to the point where you've looked at all your data, you've brought everybody to the table, you've thought about what your goals are, what might be a little bit of an additional push or additional help, some seed funds to get you a little bit further on down the road at that midpoint in the grant. So we're very excited about the structure of this that I think, having come from working in a state pretty recently, I know that you need additional investment sometimes to be able to commit staff to working on things and to really be able to prioritize, or even simply to have people travel from one end of the state to another and buy them lunch. I mean, so even small pieces of investment really catalyze great conversations and planning. So we're excited to be able to support states in that way. So this cohort of 6 states, we have a team assembled to support them in developing really targeted technical assistance for their priority needs. We will be led by a project manager who I'm lucky enough to have as part of the team, Dana Westgren, who is here. If you stand up for a second. Say hello. Yes, she is one of my senior policy analysts, in addition to Mike Bartlett, who very ably led the last panel. Very excited to have such talented people on my team to help lead this effort. So the key dates are August the 2nd is the due date. Please do check out the RFA that is posted right now. In addition to the posting of the document, we also have 2 webinars for states who are interested in engaging. If they want to walk through the application portions, they're both going to have very similar information, so don't sign up for both of them. You don't get like advanced credit for going to the second one. So the first one is on Wednesday, June 26th, and the other is Wednesday, July 17th. So excited to engage and answer any of your specific application-specific questions at that time. We'll be able to support you as you work to set this up. We're encouraging folks to bring on cross-sector teams, community colleges, four-year colleges, SHIO agencies or systems, whatever exists in the state. Of course, the governor's office needs to be on board and engaged and ready to move some of these things forward from their perspective. But then also thinking about some of those non-traditional agency connections that I had mentioned, the human services agencies or correctional agencies, or some of the agencies that support in different ways that can bring different perspectives to the table. So we're excited to see what states come up with. They never disappoint when asking them to be creative and to think about how investment like this can really catalyze change. One of the important things we're looking for too is a state that's ready and has an appetite for innovation. We don't just want to give money to a state to continue work that they're already doing. We'd love for this to be an opportunity to make some change, to approach things differently, to be open to new perspectives, to be open to adjusting some of the systems in the way that the panel addressed up here, changing the ways in which we develop or change programs or we approach serving adults. And there's lots of great pockets of examples out there across states of the way in which they're innovating or they're changing the way in which they offer programming or financing or wraparound supports to get adults to engage or re-engage in higher education. And then also that other piece that was echoed several times across the panel, which is to make it relevant and to connect it to workforce outcomes. So, information about the RFA. Dana is your contact person. We're very excited to have her lead us into this project, and I can't tell you how excited we are to support states in their efforts to serve and engage students in post-secondary opportunities that lead to careers. I'm also excited, as I mentioned, to engage with all of you. I've been getting the emails, and I'm very excited about making these connections. I hope you all will stay for the reception. It's going to be on the 2nd floor. There will be appetizers as well. So please join us. It's going to be very nice. So the 2nd floor, join us. We'll keep talking. We'll keep learning from each other. Thank you all for joining us on the live stream. We hope to be engaged with all of you on our upcoming webinars. So that concludes our agenda for today. Please join us at the networking reception, and thank you to our speakers and our panelists for your valuable contributions today. Thank you so much.